strong together is the foundation of a successful, healthy relationship. A relationship that begins before you say, I do. Before You Say I Do is the focus of this edition of St. Louis Healthy Marriage Coalition's Gateway to a Healthy Marriage series. Now, joining us today to address our couple's comments and questions are Jen Gavain, who is a licensed clinical social worker specializing in relationships, Richard Boswell, a licensed clinical social worker and a certified Gottman couples therapist, and author and relationship researcher Ann Milford. We're going to start today by hearing how our couples answered our first question: is love blind, and can you fall in love at first sight?
Sure, it's just whether it's an enduring love or not. Yeah, you can be attracted to someone, but there's a lot of proving to be done before you turn that into a marriage.
Maybe infatuation at first sight. Maybe there are strong desires at first sight. And certainly there's a connection maybe toward a person. But I think as you communicate, as you get to know each other, it builds upon that initial, whatever that feeling, whatever you want to call it, you build upon it as you get to know the person.
Yeah, I believe you can fall in love at first sight because there has to be something initially that attracts you to that person, but the longevity, I guess you can just hope and work toward.
I've never had that happen to me, so I don't know. I guess it could happen.
I believe in love at first sight, absolutely, because it happened whenever I met her.
So let's talk about what our couples had to say. We'll start with Richard Boswell. I think we all have grown up with this romantic movie concept that you meet the love of your life and fall in love instantly. Do you think that is possible?
You know, it was really fun to hear the men talking about not the infatuation, but the emotional connection and the maturing of the relationship. I really, I think people may have lust at first sight, but not love at first sight. Love at first sight, and this is really borne out by the research, love is about friendship, love's about emotional connection, love's about knowing one another, and knowing one another deeply. So what was so cool, for me anyway, because most people think of men as not thinking in those terms. Most people think of men as sort of being tuned out. Those guys were very tuned in and talked about the long-term nature of a relationship. So I don't think love is blind. I think that's pretty definitive in the research. The infatuation is part of the relationship, that attraction, but then it has to grow into a more connected relationship.
Now, Jen, obviously there's got to be some sort of spark when you meet someone or get to know someone, but what do you think about the concept of knowing that that's the one the first time you lay eyes on them?
Absolutely. I do believe there needs to be some chemistry in that first initial sighting of someone that you're interested in. But that doesn't last necessarily. So although I do think, if you want to call it lust or just wow, that person's very attractive and I'm interested in them, that can be very powerful. But I think long-term wise, sometimes those feelings fade a little bit. And if there is such a thing as love at first sight, I haven't experienced it or seen it in my practice.
Do you think, Anne, that we count on that too much, either men or women, that we expect that at first sight?
Probably, and that probably gets people into trouble, but I would kind of refer to it as having chemistry. And I think you need chemistry in any relationship, whether it be with a friend that you meet or anyone that you're going to have a relationship. You need to have that little spark, that little chemistry. And a lot of the research that I've done and a lot of writing out there indicates that you still need that spark to draw upon later on in your relationship. You need to have that sort of like a well that you can go back and dip into and remember maybe when things are kind of getting a little boring or you're going through a rough patch, you can go back and remember, oh yes, I remember that spark, that chemistry, that flame, that thing that drew you together.
What about the concept of, I know a lot of couples who are very happily married who did not have that love at first sight thing, but they were friends first. Maybe they worked together, and as they got to know each other, they came to have that spark, but not at first sight. Is that more likely, or does that help in building a stronger relationship?
Well, I think that the friendship is really, really critical, and what you share and how well you know one another. And it's not just knowing one another historically, it's also knowing one another on a day-by-day basis. And the research really talks about, on an ongoing basis, how much do I know about what's going on in my spouse's life today? And how much do I keep in touch with her? How much does she keep in touch with me? So that we can connect up and share those sort of mundane little moments that really mean something to us.
I'll often encourage clients also to go back and maybe find old love letters or emails that they initially started writing to each other in that spark kind of moment. And it's interesting that once they do that, they do remember that part of them that fell in love and can bring that to today's relationship.
Do you think that sometimes, though, that because we had that spark and we fell in love at first sight, that maybe it is a relationship that's not going to work, but we hang on to that because it's, you know, the princess and prince riding off into the sunset sort of scenario?
I think a lot of times people try to force it. They want to have love at first sight. They'll meet somebody and they'll try to force it into that mold. Oh, he's the one, and really he isn't the one. But people will try to turn it into that, you know, because every movie that you see or book that you read, that really promotes the idea of love at first sight.
And so I think what we can take from this is that it is important, and it's certainly one of those great things when you do fall in love at first sight, but the emotional connection and the friend connection is something that definitely has to follow.
Enduring.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
Have any of you personally, you said you hadn't experienced the love at first sight, but either of you two have that experience personally?
I think, now I knew my husband, I met him when I was 14 years old, but then we went on very divergent paths and then came back together, and I have to admit that he showed up at my door and I did hear the angels singing.
Now, if you don't hear angels singing, that doesn't necessarily
No,
mean.
but we had known each other for years. I think we had this very long term, we had so many things in common, and we had been friends for a really long time. So
Terrific. Well, we're going to watch one more clip here of some of our couples, and the question to our couples this time is, what do you need?